I worked as a regular pizza delivery driver during my later years of high school. Because of school, I'd always worked the night shifts on Friday and Saturday. It was a pretty laid-back job, and for the most part, I'd just be driving or standing in the shop taking orders on the phone. A couple of my friends worked there too, so I always had someone to talk to. Anyways, it was Friday night, and I'd just gotten back from my last break. The place closes at 1 a.m., so we usually stop accepting orders around 12, as we still have to clean and everything before we leave. It was 11:30, but I figured I'd get a head start on the cleaning just to pass the time. Me and my other two friends were the only ones working that night, and one was finishing up a delivery, and the other just went on break after I got back. A couple minutes into cleaning, the phone started ringing, so I picked it up and asked how I could help them. There was an older man on the line, and he asked if we were still open for deliveries. I told him yeah, but we aren't taking any large orders. They said that was okay and asked for a regular pizza and gave me the address to deliver it to. About 15 minutes later, the pizza was ready and I boxed it up and got in my car. The address was a little more than 10 minutes away, and I was probably halfway there when I pulled up behind another car stopped at a stop sign on an empty road. I waited for a few seconds, looking around to see why he was stopped for so long. Then I honked my horn gently, assuming that he'd just fallen asleep or something. The car still didn't move, so I started to pull around him, but of course just as I did that, he pressed on the gas and jolted forward down the road. I was a little bit annoyed, but I figured it was just some guy being a dick for fun, so I continued down the road. But a couple minutes later, I passed that same car pulled over on the side of the road with its headlights off. I got a really uncomfortable feeling passing them, like something didn't feel right about it. I checked my mirrors for the rest of the way to the house to make sure he wasn't trying to follow me. Finally, I turned down the address's long driveway that went between a forest of trees. I pulled up to the front of the house and put the car in park, and I made sure I had everything and went up and knocked on the door. I waited a minute or two, and then an old lady answered and asked me what I was doing. I told her I was delivering the pizza here and recited the address to her that I was given. She said that nobody here ordered a pizza, and I could tell she felt bad for me. I just thanked her and went back to my car. This wasn't the most uncommon thing that happened, as some people would do it as a prank or just give the wrong address on accident. I figured I'd get out of the lady's driveway, then call my friend to have them call the number back and confirm the address. So I started making my way out of the driveway. But as I was making my way down, bright headlights blinded my view from ahead of me. It was so bright, I knew it had to be a car coming towards me, so I quickly pressed on the brakes. I waited for the car to turn off the lights or turn their car around, but after waiting for a little bit, I figured they weren't going to move. I wasn't sure exactly what to do, as I could barely see and I knew the driveway was thin, so there was no way I could get around them. I decided to just wait and see what they do first, as I didn't really have any other option. A whole minute went by of both of us just sitting there before they turned their lights completely off. I waited for my eyes to readjust to the darkness, then looked ahead to see where their car was, but I couldn't see it. I put the car back in drive and slowly began making my way down, being cautious in case the other car started coming down the driveway again. A few seconds later, I see the car with all its headlights off parked in the middle of the path. I recognized it as the same one that was parked at the stop sign. I guess he had followed me without me noticing. I couldn't see through the windows in the dark, so as I sat there, I started to get pretty anxious and worried that there could be multiple people in there with bad intentions. Then the front driver door opened, and a man got out and began making his way towards me. Halfway to my car, he stopped and began waving at me as if he wanted me to pull up next to him. At this point, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was really starting to freak out. I tried my best to pretend to be calm though, and rolled the car next to him. My surprise, when I pulled up, he didn't say anything to me. He didn't even look at me as he started walking around my car and eventually stopped right behind me by the trunk of my car. I looked in my rear view mirror, trying to figure out what he was doing and why he was just standing there. A few moments go by as I'm looking at this man, when I suddenly come to a realization and turn my head around to the front. The other 3 doors of the car swing open and 3 more men start sprinting towards my car. My adrenaline started pumping, and I stomped on the gas, flooring it and almost hitting one of the men as I turned my car off the driveway. I swerve around their car, nearly hitting several trees before making it back onto the path and eventually out onto the main road. There was nobody else on the road at this time, so I could clearly see in my mirror when the car pulled out onto the road and started making its way towards me. I figured they weren't going to stop unless I could get somewhere that wasn't so isolated. But after 30 seconds, the men turned down a side road. I made it back to work and immediately told my friends what happened. They both convinced me to call the police to at least report it, even though I wasn't able to give much helpful information. An officer came down and I gave an official statement on the incident, and then they left just before we closed. I was surprised to get a call the next day saying that 3 of the men had been arrested after attempting to rob another car later that night in the same exact driveway that I was in. The men were caught when the lady called the police after having 2 more people try and deliver food to her that she didn't order. I guess they were using that driveway to lure delivery drivers in and rob them on the way out, since it was a narrow, isolated driveway surrounded by forests. Unfortunately though, the 4th man was able to run through the trees and make it out, and I never received any updates on him in the following days, though I'm not sure if he was ever found. The old lady said though that she was unaware and had never seen them in the driveway before that night. It's pretty crazy that this happened to me, but I'm also proud of myself for how quickly I reacted and how I was able to make it out unharmed. It definitely made my job more stressful though, and soon after I was able to change my shifts to only working during the day on the weekends. I really hope that last guy got caught though, cause who knows how many more people could be in those horrifying situations due to his escape. I worked as a food delivery driver during my first few years of college. Mainly, I would drive for DoorDash or Uber Eats. I didn't like making small talk with strangers and didn't want random people in my car, though I preferred delivering food over being a normal Uber driver. I did this for over a year with pretty much no issues, aside from the occasional customer mad that the restaurant messed up their order. Anyways, it was late Wednesday night, and I didn't have any classes in the morning, but I decided to make an extra few bucks and deliver for a little bit. I did 4 or 5 quick orders, and ended up about 20 minutes from my dorm. It was about 1 a.m. now, and I figured I should probably end it there and head back. The way the delivery apps work is pretty much you just drive around and wait for a random order to pop up, and then it'll give you an estimate of how much you'll make and how far it is. Then you either accept or decline it. On my way back, I left the app running just in case there was a really quick delivery nearby. I got a few requests, but they were a bit too far and didn't seem worth it to me. But then another one popped up just as I was pulling into my dorm. It was about 12 miles away, but the payout was really big. I'd never seen anyone offer that much money before. I gave it some thought, as it was pretty far, but it was too much money to pass up. I accepted the offer and started the directions to the restaurant. A few minutes later, I arrived and pulled up their order so I could make sure I picked up the right stuff. As I walked through the doors, I noticed the customer had only ordered 2 items, and the total was only over $6. This was really unusual, as typically the high-paying orders are because of large deliveries of expensive food. This meant that they were just giving me a really big tip. I got the food and went back to the car. During the drive there, I was really just trying to understand why they would give such a big tip for such a small order. It was a little weird, but honestly, I just came to the conclusion that it was either just a mistake or they were trying to be kind. Although 12 miles wasn't too far from my campus, I had actually never been to this area. It was really nice, with mostly gated-off neighborhood communities and huge houses. Luckily, their house wasn't gated, and I was able to just pull into the neighborhood. I looked at the homes as I passed by, and realized that the tip money made a lot more sense now. The street was long though, and I was just a couple minutes from the house when the customer sent me a text through the app. They told me to make sure I delivered the food to the right address when I pulled up. I figured maybe the map showed his neighbor's house or something, but when I arrived, I sent him a text with a description of the house and asked if that was the right one. He replied no, and I waited for a little bit, expecting him to describe his house for me, but he never did. I sent him another text describing his neighbor's house, to which he replied no again. I was starting to get pretty annoyed with this guy, and tried calling him instead, but he refused to answer. He would ring a few times, and then he declined the call. I looked at the address again, and then copy and pasted it into Google to try and look it up there. Doing this, I actually noticed that the number for the address wasn't a regular number. It had a subset of numbers on it. I'd never seen this before and wasn't even sure what it meant, so I searched the address on Google and looked at the results. When I zoomed in on the map, I saw that the address actually pointed to a spot right in between the two houses. Zooming in further, it looked like there was a really small garage, or maybe even a shed. It was barely visible. I looked up from my phone and moved my eyes to between the two houses, and sure enough, there was a small garage-like structure. It was just a few feet from the main house that my delivery app brought me to. I honestly wasn't sure what to expect, or why someone would even live there, but I already came this far, so I wasn't about to walk away now. So I got out and started heading over. As I walked up the driveway, I could clearly see what the place was. It was pretty much just a large storage garage, probably meant for keeping an old car or something. I didn't see any normal door though, so I put the bag down by the garage door. As I began taking my phone out to take a picture for the app, a man came around the right side of the garage. I looked over at him, and he just stood still, staring at me. The guy was really creeping me out, so I said, "It's right here for you, sir," as I pointed at the bag and slowly started walking away. Then he replied, telling me that this wasn't where he wanted me to drop it off. I turned around and noticed that he was still standing in the same spot. "Sorry, where did you want me to put it?" I said, starting to get really uneasy about the situation. He pointed around the back of the garage and said that the door was over there. At that point, there was no way I was going to follow that guy to wherever he was trying to get me to go. I just kind of stood there for a moment, then said sorry and quickly walked back to my car. I looked over one more time before driving away, and the man was walking back behind the garage, but he left the bag of food. I got out of there and drove back to my dorm, shaking the whole way back. Something about that whole thing felt very off, and the fact that it was in a really nice neighborhood made me even more confused. The more I thought about it though, I realized just how strange it was that he needed to specify for me not to deliver to the main house, and that he refused to take the food unless I followed him to behind the garage. I'd never had to call the police before in my whole life, and I ended up not calling them this time either. as I really wasn't sure if maybe he was just some weird harmless guy. Anyways, it freaked me out for a few days, but eventually I got over it and continued doing deliveries in my spare time. Nothing else happened, though a couple weeks later I had another big order pop up on my app, and the area of delivery was the same. I obviously declined it, but I couldn't help but think about whoever ended up accepting that order and what happened to them during their delivery. It was the beginning of fall, and I worked as a cashier at a small store near my apartment. My usual shift ended at 9 p.m., and then I'd usually go do food deliveries for a couple of hours before heading home. I actually enjoyed doing deliveries at night, as the roads weren't busy and most other delivery drivers would work during the day and would take all the orders. So I'd actually get more orders to do at night. Anyways, I had just gotten out of work, set up my app to get ready to do some deliveries. First one that came in was quick and only took about 15 minutes. Then I waited for a few minutes before the next order came in. It was a good payout and the delivery address was 20 minutes away from where I was. I headed over to the fast food restaurant to pick up their food and started making my way over to the house. Town I live in isn't too big and has a lot of empty plots of land. There's the main center of town, which is where my apartment is, and most of the restaurant. Then about 10 minutes out, there's a lot of farmland. Houses are much more spread out. Almost all of the deliveries I get are within the town area, but every once in a while I'll get a delivery further out into the farm area. I assumed this was going to be a farmhouse since it was 20 minutes away. However, the app said that the address was located in a small neighborhood area just off of a small highway. I didn't like delivering to isolated farmhouses at night, as it just kind of creeped me out, though I was happy to be delivering to a neighborhood home. Once I got off the highway, turned left, started making my way down the road toward the neighborhood. But almost immediately, I got a call from an unknown number. I declined it. Thought it was just a scam, but a few seconds later, they called again. Figuring it was probably the customer, accepted it. Hello? Asked. A few seconds went by with no response, so I just hung up. But then again, a few moments later, same number called me. I answered, and almost immediately a guy speaks and tells me I turned the wrong way. I asked him what he meant, as I had the map up. It says that I'm going the right way. But he said his address gets messed up on the delivery app, and that he always has to call and let the drivers know where to go. I said okay and asked him how to get there. He told me that when I got off the highway, he needed to take a right from that road, then take the third left. He mentioned it was a gravel path that led to his farmhouse at the end. I told him I'd be there in a few minutes, turned the car around. I've had multiple customers call me before to tell me that the address was a little off, or to give me directions on unnamed roads, as it was pretty common out here, so I honestly didn't think much of it. I passed the highway that I turned off of and continued until I found the third left and turned onto the gravel path. The path went into a small forest of trees and it was really dark. Again, I didn't like these areas at night, though I was definitely a little nervous driving down this isolated gravel road. Once I started getting nervous, I began thinking about how strange it was that the map had taken me so far in the opposite direction of the house that man claims is the actual address. I tried to bury those thoughts, assuring myself that I was just overthinking it because I was nervous. A couple minutes passed though. There was still no house in sight. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I had turned down the right path, but the trees were too close to the side, so I didn't have much room to turn around anyways. I figured I'd continue down to the end, then call to ask if I had the right place, and turn around there if not. Another minute or two went by before I finally reached the end, as it merged into a small circle driveway next to a house. I drove up to the path that led to the front door and parked the car next to a for sale sign that was put up in the front of the house. Seeing that, I wasn't sure if I had the right house, but I looked over at the front door and it was open, and I could see someone further back wave at me. Figuring that was good, I grabbed the bag and started making my way over to the door. As I stepped onto the porch and began putting the bag down, saw the man again down the hallway that led to the kitchen. He politely asked me if I could set the food down on the kitchen counter and quickly walked away as if he was in a rush. Then I heard him turn the sink on. Hesitantly, I took a step into the house and looked around. It was decorated with old furniture and accessories. It almost looked like it was completely unused. I quickly made my way down the hall and into the kitchen, but as soon as I got there, I noticed that the sink was still running. The man was nowhere in sight. This made chills run down my body. I quickly set the bag down on the counter and got out of there as quick as I could. I could hear the man yell something from the front door as I got back in my car, but I couldn't understand what he said. I put the car in drive and went back out the way I came. I didn't stop driving until I got to the parking lot of my apartment. Then I pulled my phone out and saw multiple missed calls from that same number. I blocked the number, then opened the delivery app so I could end my deliveries for the night. But that's when I noticed that I had messages from the customer through the app telling me that I had turned the wrong way and that I was at the wrong house. I went into shock for a moment, realizing that the man that had called me wasn't my actual customer, and the house I was in was just some stranger's house. I called the police immediately and reported everything to them. An officer came to my apartment to go over more details soon after. I had no idea how this man could have known that I was doing a delivery and had been able to see my location. The officer said that my phone had likely been hacked, that the man was probably monitoring everything that I was doing. Hearing this made me really uncomfortable. As if all that wasn't bad enough, the next day I was informed that the house I was at was actually vacant, as it was for sale by the owners who had moved out months ago. The man had apparently gotten in through an unlocked window in one of the rooms. As of right now, still haven't found anything significant to lead to finding the man, which makes me feel really unsafe. I don't know for sure what the man was trying to do, but I think it's a pretty good assumption that he was probably planning on kidnapping me, or maybe even worse. I try not to think about it too much, but I can't help but go over all of the horrible things could have happened on that night. I worked part-time as a DoorDash delivery driver last year. I had another job at a clothing store, but on certain days I would actually make more money doing deliveries due to more people ordering on specific days. So on those days I'd spend most of my night driving around. Doing this for almost 6 months at the time, I had gotten very familiar with it, and it was kind of just second nature. To make things better, my town rarely had any traffic, even during rush hour. Anyway, it was a regular night of delivering. I had just picked up a large order from a fancy restaurant, began making my way to the customer's house. Big, expensive orders are always the best ones to do. These orders pay more, it really didn't take any extra effort compared to other deliveries, so it kind of just felt like a bonus. I pulled into the neighborhood of large homes, which made sense considering the size of the order and the fancy restaurant. It was a very foresty area, with most of the houses hidden behind long driveways that went into the trees. The customer's house wasn't too far into the neighborhood though. It was only a couple minutes down the road. Usually I'd park on the side of the street and walk up to the front door. With driveways like these, I would obviously just go down them to get closer to the house since they were so far away. But as soon as I turned onto the driveway, I slammed on my brakes. There was a chain held up by 2 pillars on either side of the driveway, blocking the entrance. I'd seen these before, but I'd rarely ever see the chain actually connected. Figured they'd just forgotten to undo it, so I got out of my car and made my way over to the pillar on the right side. I immediately noticed there was a lock on it that required a key, preventing me from just removing it. I stood there annoyed, looked down the driveway, but I couldn't even see the house from where I was, so I went back to my car and grabbed my phone to call the customer. A man answered after the first ring. I explained that I was their DoorDash driver, that the chain was blocking the entrance to their driveway. He responded, saying that there was no easy way to unlock it right now. The house wasn't very far down, so I shouldn't have to walk very far. I pretended to be nice and said okay, and the Rich family, I whispered to myself as I reached into the passenger seat to grab the large bag of food. I made sure to lock my car, then walked around the chain and down the path. About a minute into the walk, I started getting a little nervous. It was really dark, and they didn't have any lights on the side of their driveway. I still wasn't able to see the house yet either. I thought was strange since they had told me that it wasn't a long walk. Then I heard crunching footsteps coming from the dark trees to the left of me. I stopped and stared at the direction they were coming from. They came closer and closer. I began to make out a figure of a man, holding his hand up as if to say hello. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to hide my shaky voice. The man joined me on the driveway and explained that he was the one I just talked to on the phone. I was still uncomfortable, asked what he was doing. Took a step forward, then began saying that the driveway took a sharp turn up ahead. It was actually a shortcut built through the trees, so he figured he'd meet me halfway since it was a long walk for me. I found this whole situation to be really strange. He had said on the phone that it was a short walk. Now he was admitting that it was long. Just didn't add up. The man stood a few feet away from me and held his hand out for the bag. I hesitantly stepped towards him, handed him the food. He thanked me and turned around to head back the way he came. He stopped and turned to face me again. "I forgot to bring cash," he said, looking me in the eyes. Something about the way he said it made me extremely uncomfortable. Oh, I said don't worry about it and started walking back down the driveway to my car. Walked to drive you back to your car once I didn't respond and walking faster down the dark driveway. A few seconds later, I heard leaves crunching. The man walked back into a tree. I was just glad he didn't try to follow me. Once I got back to my car, I drove off quickly and did my deliveries for the night. When I made it home, I reported it to the police just in case. An operator said they would send an officer down to talk to the owners of the house. I still get chills thinking about the whole situation, mainly because I got a call a couple hours later from an officer explaining that he talked to the residents living in the house, but they had no idea what he was talking about. They didn't order anything. Delivery. I don't know if the residents were lying or not. Either way, it was a very disturbing experience and has made me a lot more cautious when doing deliveries at night. It was a regular night of delivering pizzas around my town. I was in the middle of heading to probably my 8th or 9th customer of the night. Typically just play music and kind of space out as I drive between the houses and the restaurant, as it can get really boring after a while. But as I made my way down the dark, empty roads, I noticed a couple warning lights on my dashboard suddenly turn on. It was a little alarming, but they weren't anything important, so I continued on. My car was pretty old and had a lot of miles on it. For the most part it did well, so I figured it must just be a false alarm or something. Fortunately though, as I continued down the road, more and more warning lights began to turn on before the check engine light flashed. Eventually my car sputtered to a stop. I'd never had a car break down on me before, though I honestly wasn't too sure what to do. The first thing I did was try the ignition again, just to see if it would start back up, but it was completely dead. I looked around and noticed I was pretty far from anywhere useful. I knew where I was. I'd driven down this road many times before, but the nearest place that would be open at this time was a gas station that was about a half-mile away. So I called the customer and let them know about my situation. and then I called my work and let them know as well. A manager basically said to not worry about delivering the pizza. Just figure out my car situation and then head home for the... That actually gave me a bit of relief, knowing that I didn't have to worry about work anymore, but I still wasn't really sure what to do. I ended up calling my brother, who lived about 40 minutes away, but he was the only person that I knew would still be awake at this time. He picked up and immediately asked me what was going on. I told him about my situation. He let out a big sigh, then said he could come and pick me up and drop me off at home. I told him exactly where I was and thanked him, then sat back in my car, relieved that I was able to get some help relatively quickly. After a few minutes of waiting, I opened up the box of pizza and took a couple of slices, figuring it would be a waste if I didn't help myself. It was actually really dark in the car since the battery was dead, so I had my phone light on and waited on the center console so that I could see a bit better. But after about 15 minutes of waiting, I saw a figure appear from down the road, walking towards my car. I felt pretty vulnerable in my position, so I turned my phone light off, hoped that when they passed by, they wouldn't even notice that I was there. Though once they got a few feet from my car, they slowed down and began looking at my car as if they were inspecting it or something. Then the man came up to my window and knocked. He wanted me to roll it down. Of course, I wasn't able to, so I loudly spoke, telling him that I couldn't. Looked offended and responded, asking me for a lift to the gas station down the road. This was when I started to get a strange feeling about the guy. Felt like it was pretty obvious that my car had broken down, though I knew he had to be up to something. I didn't respond and kind of just sat there watching the guy, hoping that he would go away. Continued asking for help though, getting more and more aggressive about it. Then he went silent for a moment, before suddenly grabbing the door handle, shaking the whole car as he tried to open the door. I began panicking, unsure of what to do, so I looked around for something to defend myself. All I could find was a small screwdriver in my glove box. At this point, the man started stabbing the window with a small knife as if he were trying to break it. He made a few large scratches on it, before beginning to wedge his knife in the top of the window, forcefully push it down. I was yelling at him and screaming for help, but I knew my efforts would go unheard. He continued for over a minute with pure anger in his eyes as he tried everything to get in. And he stopped, stood there for a moment, silent, breathing heavily, pushed his face against the window and stared at me, raging disgust. Then smashed his fist into the door one last time before running back down the road into the darkness. When my brother arrived, I showed him the scratches and dents on my door. He left in a hurry, calling the police on the way to my house. I'd never feared for my life as much as I did on that stranded road. But the one thing I can't get out of my mind ever since then was to look in the man's eyes as he stared at me through the window. It felt as though I was just inches away from a monster, eager to perform a brutal and horrible attack on me as I sat there alone and blood. During college, I worked at a small restaurant that was open late, which was usually 1 a.m. most nights. Most customers would either come in and order or call an order for pickup, but every once in a while, someone will ask for a delivery. I always enjoyed doing the deliveries because I'd get to leave the place and drive around while getting paid. Plus, the tip money was always nice. Anyways, we had a small delivery order for a customer that ordered at 12, so this was my last delivery of the night before getting off. I got in the car and started down the road. The GPS said it was 15 minutes away, but our restaurant was located right next to a highway, so for pretty much every delivery, I'd be on the highway for a few minutes before taking an exit and entering a neighborhood. Got on the ramp to enter the highway, and usually no one is out this late at night, but as I started to go down the ramp, I noticed a car coming toward me in my side mirror. From the headlights, I could tell they were far away, but they were also going really fast. Either way though, I had to merge into the highway, so I slowly turned in and stayed in the far right lane. Car behind me then merges from the middle lane into the far right lane as well, practically slamming on the brakes as he comes towards the back of my car. the hell is wrong with this thought, as he just put both of our lives in danger for absolutely no reason. I figured he had to be drunk or just some idiot that thought it would be funny to scare me, but after a few minutes, he still stayed right behind me. I wasn't really sure what he was doing at this point, but it wasn't funny at all. My exit was coming up, so I was just hoping he'd leave it alone once I turned off the highway. But of course the guy followed me. The house I was delivering to was in a big neighborhood right next to the highway. I turned in and started driving down the neighborhood street. Once we got deeper in, the guy behind me turned all of his headlights off. Just when I really started to panic. I'd had stupid drivers follow me for a bit because I accidentally cut him off for something. This was going too far, and I hadn't even done anything. Thankfully, the house was just down the street at this point, so I figured I'd pull into their driveway and try and get the customer to answer the door as quickly as possible so that I wouldn't be alone. I drove my car up the right side of their driveway, which I immediately realized was a bad idea as the car pulled up right next to mine on the left side of the driveway. Before I could even get out, a man came out of the car, swinging his driver door open aggressively. Started yelling at me angrily and waving his hands around, making his way towards my window. This guy sounded completely crazy and his words were slurred, barely making any sense. I was pretty confident that he was just drunk, wasn't too scared. Then he pulled out a small knife from his pocket, started banging on the window with it. I quickly put my car in reverse and backed out as quick as I could. The man continued to chase my car down the driveway, waving his knife around and screaming. I drove a few blocks down, then pulled over next to a random house, called the customer that I was supposed to deliver to. Picked up immediately and asked me if I was okay. I guess they were watching from their window. I told them I was fine and asked if the guy was still there, but thankfully he had left. I was able to get them their food. I told my coworkers what had happened when I got back. None of them believed me. Honestly, I don't blame them though. So it was just a crazy situation, and it really didn't make much sense. I'm not sure what that guy wanted, but I know it definitely could have ended much worse than it had. Being a delivery driver for several pizza places a few years back, had a lot of experiences with weird customers, just strange things that would happen at night. But this one night takes the prize for the most disturbing and unusual situation. I had been working at the specific chain pizza shop for just under a year. I worked mid-shifts and night shifts alongside one other coworker for the most part. It would stay busy basically up until closing at 2 a.m., though there wasn't a ton of time to mess around, especially since it was just the two of us. I'll call my coworker Tom to keep privacy. Tom was older than me by a few years, was a quiet, hard worker. He was in charge during the night shifts, would make all the pizzas, while I would deliver them. Both of us would answer calls though, depending on who was busy and who wasn't. Anyway, it was just past 11 p.m., and I had gotten back from a delivery when the phone rang. Seeing Tom in the middle of making a pizza, I picked up the phone. A man on the other line spoke, asking for a large sausage pizza. Put in the order and asked if he needed anything else. The man didn't answer for a moment, and he repeated himself, saying that he'd like a large sausage pizza. This time, I could tell through the way he mumbled it out that he was likely drunk. I confirmed that he just wanted one pizza, and the man said yes. I sent the order through, and grabbed my next delivery and dropped it off. Heading back to the shop, Tom had finished the guy's order and prepped it for delivery, so I grabbed it off the counter and ran to my car. I noticed as I was grabbing the order though, Tom was giving me a weird look, as if he wanted to say something. Decided not to. Again though, Tom was pretty quiet and soft-spoken, but wasn't very odd. The address was a good 15 minutes away. There was no traffic at this time, but I got there pretty early. The house was normal, but had a lot of land on either side, the neighbors' homes barely visible through the trees. Got out and went around to the passenger door to pick up the pizza, and I headed up to the porch and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, man came and opened the door wide open. It wasn't all that strange. I always found it odd when people would open their door that wide, as it was just unnecessary. His face when he saw me seemed very confused and surprised, if he hadn't expected to see me. Hearing he was just drunk and out of it, I handed him the box and told him his total, which he slowly and awkwardly handed me cash, not saying anything. He held the box of pizza while standing in front of me and looked at it with a strange intensity. And he moved his eyes up towards me, not at me. He was looking over my shoulder. He saw some. He was just staring at it with that same intensity. Before shaking his head slowly, he was saying no. Getting really uncomfortable watching this man, I couldn't help but look back. I turned my head over my right shoulder, looked toward the driveway. A few feet from my car was a hooded man running back toward the tree. My heart jumped, felt my body fell into a sort of shock, trying to figure out what to do. I turned back around to face the man at the door. He immediately stepped back and slammed the door shut. All happened so fast, just a matter of seconds, and gave me no time to react. With the door closed in front of me, I turned to face the hooded man again. He was lost in the dark tree line. I stumbled off the porch and ran to my car, backing out of the driveway as soon as possible, driving back to work. I calmed myself during the drive, still couldn't understand what happened. When I got back, I told Tom about the encounter. He seemed to have very little reaction, and rather just told me to deliver the next order when I was ready. I did as he said. On my way back from the delivery, ended up pulling over and calling the police to let them know just in case. They said they would have an officer check it out and call me back to update me. I got a call an hour later. Once I got out of work, I waited in the parking lot for the police to show up and talk to me. When the officer came up to my car, he mentioned that he talked to the man at the resident who matched the description I gave him, and the guy told the officer that he was just waiting for his buddy, Tom, to show up since he knew he worked at the pizza shop. When asked about the hooded man, he gave no details, saying he didn't know anything about that, didn't see anyone. That information, I was even more horrified and confused. I thought maybe they called thinking Tom was a delivery driver, setting him up so that they could jump him. That would explain the hooded man by my car, the surprise of the guy at the door. I also think back to that look Tom gave me, thinking maybe he was going to warn me of something. I talked to Tom on multiple occasions about it though. He gave me quick, useless answers, saying the guy was just an old friend and that he didn't know anything about anything. I moved on to another pizza shop very soon after that incident. But now that the horror of the situation is in the past, and I know it likely wasn't a target on me specifically, I enjoy trying to figure out the mystery. Still don't know for sure what the situation was. It was by far the strangest and creepiest I've ever had. Was doing my Sunday night drives for extra money with DoorDash and Uber Eats. Friends show me how to use both at the same time and make more money per hour. One of the biggest issues with doing delivery service is that you have a lot of downtime where you just drive around waiting for an order to pop up. But if you work both apps at the same time, you can get rid of all that downtime, constantly be making money. Though I was doing this for a few hours, racing back and forth between houses and restaurants, I got a small order from a nearby restaurant. The house was far away. These are the worst kinds of orders. You drive far and get paid less. Though this one offered a large amount, getting the tip much crazy big. Accepting it, picked up the order and began the 25-minute drive to their address. Halfway through the drive, while on a side road, got a call from the app, assumingly being the customer. I answered, asking if this was my Uber Eats customer. A man confirmed he was my customer and apologized profusely, saying he ordered from his friend's account, got to change the address. He said his house was just around the block though, proceeded to give me direction, telling me a couple turns to take as I reached a friend's house. I asked him for the address, in case I got lost. He responded saying I'll see him outside waiting for him. He hung up. Obviously, was not normal. However, more than halfway there at this, and I gave the man the benefit of the doubt, forgetting to switch it from your friend's address seemed like a legit thing that could happen. Could have also been the fact that I was a bigger guy. Helped me convince myself, go through with delivery. Wasn't really afraid of it. When I got to the supposed friend's house, I took the turns as the man had said, drove down a dimly lit neighborhood road till I reached a no outlet sign. Saw the road ended just a few houses down. Feeling confident I had taken the turns as the man had said, pulled over and grabbed my phone to call the customer. Just as I was clicking into my recent calls, a knock at my driver window made me jump. A bit embarrassed at how noticeably startled I was, rolled the window down to greet him. Looking up at the man, his face had no emotion, completely straight faced. I let go of the window button and immediately pressed the lock button, followed by the man sticking a gun through the half-open window right at my head, yelled out. I heard more voices call back, followed by a group of people running up to the car and trying to open the door handle. They were all yelling commands at each other. In the heat of the moment, couldn't make out what they were saying. I was in a full-on shock, staring into the barrel of the gun. If I had to guess, there were at least 5 or 6 people surrounding my car. This moment, I don't even remember having any thought, but I can only describe it as more of a reflex-type reaction. Because when the man holding the gun looked away for a second, suddenly slammed on the gas, pouring it down the Surprised the man even held onto his gun, pulled his hand out of the window just in time. Seeing the end of the road though, quickly did a 3-point turn. When I faced the other end of the street again, they were all gone. Not a single one of them anywhere on the road, sidewalk, by the houses. They must have just fled the scene instant I began driving. As soon as I made it out of the neighborhood, called 911. These gang-type attacks are relatively common around me, but I never thought it would happen to me. Though nothing came of it, nobody being found and every piece of evidence leading to nowhere, I see this event as a sort of wake-up call for me. I realized in the moment that the man put a gun to my head, being a big, confident man, absolutely nothing. Taking a risk like that was purely stupid, because literally anyone with a weapon have your life in their hand in an instant. You work a job like, do anything where you see strangers regularly. Careful, because putting yourself in a risky situation with a stranger could be the last thing you ever do. During COVID, delivering groceries became pretty popular. Even after, people still had them delivered to their house. I was a picker for those orders when we were understaffed. Pretty much all the time, I was also dropping them off. Wasn't a bad job. I actually enjoyed driving to people's homes. I got to see nice houses, and I didn't have to deal with the constant questions from customers. I wasn't complaining. I got tips sometimes too, which was nice. Most of the time though, I left the groceries at the doorstep, took a picture as proof, and then left. But I did have moments where I got to meet the help them take in the grocery. One instance, this older lady from Serbia, her name was Vesna. She loved me. Got to know each other, because every Thursday she'd have pretty much the same stuff ordered to her house at the exact same time. First few times I dropped off her grocery, she never came outside, but I'd catch her peeking out the window at me. I'd give a little wave, take my pick, and get back in the truck and leave. I think once she realized it was the same person delivering her groceries every time, got more comfortable. She came out and greeted me. Then slowly over time I started bringing in the groceries, laying them on her counter. She was pretty old, so I was happy to help. She also tipped nicely too. The more I went, the more I got to know her. She was recently widowed and lived alone. All her children lived far away. I only saw them once or twice a year for the holidays, when she could take the train. She was also retired, but She used to be a broker, explained her nice house. I always looked forward to Thursdays. One was no different. She had ordered everything on Monday, as she always did, and I was dropping off the following Thursday. When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed that something was off. She wasn't at the door like she usually was. The door was open. I also noticed that all her blinds were closed. Drained. Always kept them open. Glance could. And I went up to the open front door, not seeing her in the doorbell. I waited for a bit. There was no answer. Knocked a few times. No answer again. Naturally started to become a little worried. He was old, though my immediate thought was maybe she fell or had a heart attack or something. Kinda stood there wondering what I should do. Thought maybe I should go inside, but I was also on the job. I know the rules are that no one answered, but to leave the groceries on the porch. Being her friend though, decided it best to go inside and at least put her groceries on the counter like usual. Door was open after all. Grabbed all the bags in both of my hands, walked straight into the kitchen. All the lights were off. Everything was quiet. In the bags on her counter, called out her name, and in no response. Started walking out. Calling the police crossed my mind, but I didn't really know how to explain this was an emergency. What if she was just out of the house? Maybe she was just visiting someone. I just wasted the officer's time. Billy was in a weird position. Just knew something was wrong. But just as I got to the doorway leading outside, I heard movement in the house upstairs. I felt relieved for a moment, calling out for Vesna. And then there was again no response. No one came to the door or answered. After a minute of standing there, kept hearing shuffling movement, as if someone was moving stuff around upstairs. Started to feel really awkward and uncomfortable. I headed back outside and got in the car. I sat there for a little while, and after a minute, I saw the curtains on the second story move to the side. Someone was looking at me, window. Pulled out and drove around the corner. Parked on the street and sat there. They confused. I didn't know if it was her and she just didn't want to see anyone. Be one of her kids. I was also concerned with whether or not I should call police. I drove off, went around the block, and then decided to drive by her house again. I sat there for a little while again, but I saw the upstairs curtains open. I saw a male figure look out, then closed it quickly, seeing my truck scared him. I knew Vesna had 2 daughters, and she had a son, passed away years ago. So I'm not sure who could possibly be at her house with her not there. Where would she be anyway? I had been there too long though, to get back to. Following week, there were no orders from her. First time, almost a year. Drove by her house after I got off on Thursday, and in the driveway was an officer's car. I got home, I searched her name, found that she had been filed as missing only a few days after I had been there to deliver her grocery. I noticed the date they said she would likely last at home though, the day after she had ordered the grocery. 2 days before, I had gone to her house, saw that man. Went to the police with all the information I had. I don't know who that man was, or if I was close to having something happen to me as well. But it's been nearly 3 years now, and there have been no updates. I did deliveries for my parents' restaurant when I was in high school. I just turned 16 and got my driver's license, and my parents were always wanting to start offering delivery. I didn't want to be a waiter or work at the register, so driving sounded like a good option. When this happened, I'd been doing deliveries for a few months, so I was pretty comfortable with it. It was a Thursday, around 8 p.m. My dad gave me an order to deliver. got in my car, it was actually my mom's SUV, and started the drive. Google Maps said the house was 25 minutes away. The town was small, but 25 minutes away was actually pretty far. As I drove, started to recognize the area as being on the edge of town. I still had 10 minutes to go. Never been this far out in this direction before, but I was definitely paying attention and keeping my eyes open. I wasn't scared per se, just felt uncomfortable. The only houses I was passing now, farmhouse, far from the main road. When the directions told me to turn, was down a long, unpaved path and straight to one of these farmhouses. Now I was starting to get a little freaked. Farmhouse, this far out at night, was probably the last place I wanted to be. But I knew I was probably just spooking myself. It was just a simple delivery. Drove down to the end of the path. To end it, just became a small grass field in front of the house. It wasn't clear whether or not to drive on the grass, so I just parked the car there and got out. It was eerily quiet. All I could hear were my footsteps on the grass as I walked up to the house. Porch light was on. No other lights were on inside the house. Was looking over my shoulders constantly. Walked quickly. The longer I was out there, more uncomfortable I was. Just before I reached the porch, heard something. Sounded like it was coming from the backyard behind the farmhouse. It was loud, the wooden door opening. Stepped onto the porch, dropped the bag on the doorstep, and then rang the doorbell, started rushing back to the car. I was regretting how far I parked. Wished I just drove on the grass. As I listened to the only sound of my footsteps under me, started to hear more. Footsteps running behind me in my direction. Turned around, saw 3 men sprinting at me through the grass. Tried to run back to my car. In a second, I was tackled to the ground. One of them held me down, while another started taking everything from my pocket. Was yelling and screaming for help, but I knew nobody could hear me. It all happened really fast. Once they looted my pocket, one of the men kicked me in the stomach, and they all ran and got in the car, turning around and driving away. Got up, watched the headlights disappear along empty road. I had no phone and no way to get back. Didn't know what else to do. Start walking toward the road. When I reached the road, started walking down the way I came. I had no way of telling time. I think I was walking for 30 to 40 minutes before a patrol car pulled up in front of me. Parents had called for them to check on me as I wasn't responding. Sum it up, cops found a small barn behind the farmhouse with another restaurant delivery bag inside it. Think they tried to do the same thing to someone before me. Probably missed their chance, in doubt for some reason, because there were no other reports. The actual owners of the farmhouse were out of town. They had no involvement. Phone was able to be tracked though, and was found thrown in a field off the side of the road, too far away. Stolen car, however, be weeks to be located. It was found nearly 400 miles away, had been almost entirely empty. This was almost a year ago now. Those 3 men that attacked me, still yet to be identified. I was a delivery driver for Pizza Hut during college. A bunch of my buddies from school also worked there, so it was laid back and sometimes even fun. It would get really busy with deliveries up until 7 to 8 o'clock, then it would have a sudden drop-off in orders. Our place accepted delivery orders until 11, then would only accept pickup orders until 12. It was a Saturday night, so it was busier than most other days, but after 9:30, there were no more orders. We had someone pick up an order around 10:15. We had nothing else until 10:50, when the phone started ringing. Hello, to Hut. I waited for a sec. I could hear light breathing on the other side, but they weren't responding. Hello? Finally, a woman started speaking. She was talking quietly, had a shaky voice. She asked for a small pepperoni pizza be delivered to her address. I said okay. Just before I hung up, something in me made me ask if she was okay. There was just something off about the way she was talking. She said she was just fine and hung up. Sent the order through. 15 minutes later, I got on the road. The house was a couple blocks away, and there were no other cars out, so I got there in just a few minutes. As I drove up the driveway and parked, I saw a heavy light coming from around the garage where the front door was. I got the pizza and the receipt ready, and as I looked back, saw the light constantly going in and out. Someone was walking in front of it. I rounded the garage, and realized the light was coming from inside the house, shining out the open front door. Stepped onto the porch, and before I even reached the door, I heard footsteps rushing down some stairs inside. Then a man came into the doorway. He was a tall, heavy-set, bald man, but what was really weird was that he was completely out of breath. He was taking big, exhausted breaths and had sweat dripping from his head. Sure, he could have just been working out. The expression on his face just made it all the more unnerving. He looked angry, frustrated. He didn't want me to be there. I don't think I've ever seen someone that unhappy that their pizza arrived. I asked him if the order was correct, since he obviously wasn't the one who placed it, which then made me think back to the woman on the phone. Putting everything together, it for an uncomfortable possible scenario in my head. Said the total and handed the man the receipt. Hold on. In my wallet, he said, walking down the hall toward what I assume was the kitchen. As I waited for a moment, I heard a quiet sound coming from inside the house upstairs. It was a dull thump. Someone was hitting the wall. I heard it again, louder this time, and seconds later, the man came rushing down the hallway, grabbing the box from my hands, throwing cash at me, then slammed the door in my face. Stood there in shock for a second, hearing the man's footsteps rushing upstairs. I couldn't hear much else, so I walked back to my car while processing. Once I got out of the driveway, drove a minute down the road, then pulled over. I decided it best to call the police, just give them all the information I had, and ask them to just do a checkup to make sure it was all okay. When I got back to Pizza Hut, I told my friends about the unusual situation. Thought it was odd too, but none of them seemed worried about it. The rest of my shift went by fast. I got home at 12:15. Not long after, I got a call. It was an officer who did a wellness check on the woman that I said was at the house. Only, said there was no woman at all. Described the man, but he was allowed inside the home and never saw anyone else. The man said he lived alone and had no idea what woman I was talking about. Know what I heard though? No one else was in that house, and it was definitely a woman that called to place the order. The fact that the man was lying about things that I was 100% sure about made me really uneasy. Cop told me that there wasn't much else to be done unless something else came up. It's been a long time since this all happened, but I still think back to it. I could be blowing it all out of proportion. There's a big part of me doesn't think so. My name is Tommy. I started doing Uber Eats last year after I lost my part-time retail job. I'd seen their ads everywhere, how the job was so relaxing, easy money. Some of my friends were curious about the gig too. Though, one for the team, figure out if all the hype was true. It wasn't. Having around on a time crunch made the gig really stressful. Sometimes it would be for a couple bucks. I was only a teenager. The only bills I had to pay were my car payment and car insurance, so making a ton of money wasn't necessary. It did feel like I was getting ripped off for the amount of time and work it pushed aside getting a different job that was lazy. After this happened, I quit right away. Picked up an order from a Chinese place, heading to the customer's address. I don't remember it being a large order or anything. I think it was just a normal small order, a small payout. On the way to their address, got a text in the Uber Eats app. It was my customer, asking where I was. And another text came in, telling me to hurry up. I was driving. I couldn't respond, but I was just confused, honestly a little annoyed. Just picked up the order a couple minutes prior, though it wasn't like I was running late or anything. Shrugged it off, thought it was just a mistake on their part. The address wasn't far, only about 10 minutes. It was in the less well-off neighborhood in my town though. Pretty old and small houses. Actually funny though, because the customers in smaller, cheaper houses usually tipped more than the rich. Anyway, pulled up next to their driveway, got out of my car, holding their bag of food. What caught my attention, walked up their driveway, was that the house had all of its lights off. It wasn't the most scary thing in the world. It was something I took note of. I got up to the front door, knocked quickly, and took my phone out to the picture of it up. Just as I snapped the photo, "Hey!" a man yelled from my left, standing by the corner of the house. "Yum!" and awkwardly said hi. Started walking toward me, taking the key out of his pocket. I don't know what took so long. Walked right in front of me, held the single key up, unlocked the front door. His attitude had me in disbelief. Didn't know what to do or say. I just stood there like an idiot. "Come here. Your help. I'm driving." Quick. Waited by the door, holding it open. No, I'm okay." Back door. The man looked angry. That told me, reaching out, like trying to grab me. I jolted my shoulder back to avoid his hand, then backed up and walked away from the porch. And just as I got to the driveway, bright headlight flashed over me. The man by the door ran outside and around the house, leaving the front door open, or pulled up the driveway. Turned out to be the homeowner, returning from dinner. The man I met at the door didn't live there. Homeowners had no idea who he was or how he had gotten a key to the house. Called the police, explained the situation. Knowing everything now, though, made more sense that the man wanted me to rush to the house. He probably knew that the homeowners could be back at any minute, and he wanted to have enough time to do whatever it was he was going to do to me when they got back. Still don't have any answer what happened that night, or what was going to happen. Don't think I ever will, but I have stopped doing deliveries.